Why is this war very important for America? Why they look so interested and invested in the war?
And
What is in it for them? What's their interest?
I think what America is, what Trump is saying actually, or how he's copying, what President Trump is copying out of the thing is saying that he doesn't, his official statement is that this was not our war, this is Biden's war, and most Americans are against this war, and we feel like we've been pulled into a war that's actually Europe's doing and President Biden's administration. And what he claims is that they wanted nothing to do with a war. They just want peace and they want a protectionist society. However, with what President Trump is requesting of Ukraine, with the minerals that are in these critical areas that they're connected to, people think that the interest in this war now, under the President Trump presidency, is those minerals.
This is the Policy Digest, a Center for Policy Analysis podcast that explores how African societies are governed and how people and their leaders are shaping the future of their communities. Through candid conversations and insightful analysis, we aim to provide a deeper understanding of the political, economic, and social landscape of Africa. So sit back, relax, and get ready to explore the diverse and dynamic world of African governance.
Hello, my name is Joseph, and I'm the host of the Policy Digest. So today we want to touch on a subject that at the moment is taking the waves by a whirlwind, and that's on whether American foreign policy on the Ukraine-Russia war is effective. But before we go to that, I just want to read a few words from Bernie Sanders. So at the beginning of the war, when there was debate on the matter, he gave a speech, and it was particular on a few issues which I think could set this conversation going. Okay, first of all, these are his words, so they're not mine, but they're relevant. So he says, Putin may be a liar or a demagogue, but it is hypocritical for the United States to pretend that we do not operate under the same principle or spheres of influence. So he further on says, for over 200 years under the Monroe Doctrine, Washington has claimed the right to intervene across Latin America whenever our interests were threatened. In 1962, he says, and he was so emphatic here, we nearly went to nuclear war because the Soviets placed missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. And he then continues to say that even today, American leaders defend the Monroe Doctrine as alive and well. So the long and short is trying to say that America finds itself in a position where it has to oppose an idea which it stands for. It's like a contradiction of sorts. The second context that will be important for this conversation is the approach of President Joe Biden, the president of the former president of the United States, and the approach of President Trump are different on Ukraine, and you could have noticed how the campaigns were going. That's the second context. The third piece, and before we enter the conversation, and as I introduce the guest, is just last week, you could have seen pictures of 7 European leaders who joined Ukrainian President Zelensky in Washington in a rare display of transatlantic unity. That's after, again, as a response to the meeting that President Trump had with Vladimir Putin. So this specific conversation is supposed to get into the deeper intricacies on how America has generally approached, as a function of their foreign policy, the Ukraine-Russian war. And in order to do that, we are joined by Natasha Hadijjah Sebunya, a policy enthusiast, and she's very keen on informing young people about structures that define their future. She's quite invested in conversations that shape foreign policy, and has had a higher education and undergraduate education within the United States of America. She'll be telling us about that. Has been an alumni of one of the most prestigious foreign policy executive programs, and has an MA in public policy at the University of Melbourne. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
Happy to be here. I must start by saying the first time SEPA was to have a conversation around foreign policy. We were trying to get recommendations, so I reached out to Professor Ahmed and was like, hey, you need to meet Tasha. So that's how I got to know you. Thank you for the great work you're doing. Would you like to walk us through your background in foreign policy, and maybe that sets us off into the conversation?
Okay, so I did public policy, which is really a very dispassionate course. It's really like people who work behind the scenes, like the gnomes. You just get into you work in the ministry, and you just figure out like maybe how can we make the drainage work for people? How can we make the sewers work? That kind of like boring work, which I find interesting. And then I try to it's when you look at the political side or explanation of how things work, or like the academic side of how things work, it's very exciting. It's very this, but policy is really just about getting the job done. You talk to everybody, you do that kind of thing. And I tried to work in Uganda, and I saw that Uganda has like fascinating, has like really, really good a technical team. Usually you go to the ministry and you read the papers of how to do something, and all of that is there because the technical guys always have done the job, right? Even when you look at the disaster we had with Chitezi, there was an engineer who had already pointed out that this kind of disaster is going to happen. Then of course politics comes into play, and all these other things about how things work always like causes the chaos, right? So a lot of times people who work in public policy are frustrated. You know the solution, but you don't have any avenues of how to do things.
Political will to execute.
Then I went into foreign policy, and then foreign policy is more exciting. It's dispassionate as well. And I met Al Haji, and he pumped out any kind of idealism. He like flashed it out of my mind, any idealism that I had, right? He kind of told us that there's no permanent friends, there's no permanent enemies. The only thing in the world is interests. And it shifted my entire worldview. It made me stop being so young and so idealistic about how the world works. And it helped me, I think, come to terms with like, I need to have a strategy, I need to have an interest, and I need to look at world leaders and how the world works more pragmatically and more realistically, and with more long-term vision about how things should go. And so I found that like very important, and I feel like especially it helped me like lose my innocence as a young person, to lose my idealism and to become more practical.
Fresh from school, right?
Yeah, at very like
pumped up.
Yeah, like if we protest, if we do this, something is going to change.
The world will change in one second.
Yeah.
Right?
So like Al Haji helped me understand that you need to have that. Yeah.
In terms of the practical experience, I get you, and I think that's important. So I think we could just get straight into the conversation. So I trust you've studied the way the approach of the United States has shaped up over the years towards Ukraine. So I just wanted you to start with a comparative. Are there any differences between how, say, President Biden and President Trump have handled the foreign policy program with regards to the Ukraine-Russian war?
So I think for a long time coming, people have known that or have predicted that what we're going to witness is a decline in the empire of America, right? And I think what America is saying is that they're not accepting that decline, and so they're rearranging themselves to be better for the world, right? And around for the 90s, America enjoyed a unipolar world where America was the world power. So America could afford to come into countries and promote its liberalism, could come into countries and, promote democracy. It could afford to like tell all its like friends and allies that if you have a war, what Biden was doing, we're there 100%, right? But the world has shifted, You have now China for America to compete with. And of course, the old America, which is liberalism and multicultural, might have partnered with China.
Oh, yeah.
But something shift, I think America decided to that what was going on with China was something that needs to be competed with. And if you follow a lot of America, what was happening in America at that time, they're saying that China is cheating, China is, using this spyware. And so I think under the Trump presidency, they decided that we're going to shift completely and we're going to compete. We're getting a low deal in China. So America moved from being a globalist to being a nationalist. That's one of the shifts that happened. And it also moved from being liberal and promoting democracy to now saying we're going to be nationalist, we're going to be protectionist, and we're going to
like
advance
America
our
first.
we're going to advance our, which is what what Trump always says, make America great again, which is why we're seeing a collapse of USID. We're seeing a retreat from democratic missions. We're seeing a retreat in how far they want to go in along with their allies and how they're pushing for, that sort of thing. So I think that's the major shift that has happened between Biden and Trump. And I think it's a larger response for America. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to get into the nuances, why do you think the Democrats specifically, because I think when Biden came in within the mix, they went back to the I'm about to call it warmongering, but I think the Democrats love going just head on to war and going and facing the enemy as it is. I think with Obama, why do they love that approach? Where they love is warmongering the word?
Warmongering. Well, first of all, I think that's not a fair label to put on Democrats.
Yeah.
I think that Democrats actually have they fear their power, I guess, because I feel like once you see, for a long time, people thought that America's foreign policy is consistent. Everybody was like, no matter who the president is, America's foreign policy is going to be what it is, And for a lot of times, people said, with Obama's intervention in Libya, a lot of people who were academics at the time were saying, oh, well, it's bad, but I don't think Obama had any power to stop anything, because America's foreign policy largely remains the same. Yeah. But then you have Trump who comes in and shows us that actually you can overturn the whole thing, And so I think what Democrats have is a fear of power somewhat, but I don't think it's fair to say they warmonger, because under Obama, we saw a different Iran-America relationship. America, they were working towards disarming the nuclear things, and even that's one of the, the toughest. There's a lot of friction that has come with the Republicans over that relationship that Obama had managed to do with Iran. It was not warmongering with Iran. Obama was less Islamophobic, I feel, which is, people who are Islamophobic are actually the ones that are usually warmongering. He was also more peace-oriented, I think. And also, what else did Obama do? His relation with Cuba. So I think maybe he was less warmongering with the people that Republicans don't like. So I think it's not fair to say that they're entirely warmongering, although they do have I think that sending troops out to Ukraine to the level of things that they did and pushing Ukraine that far for a war that is largely looking like people are right when they said that Russia could defeat Ukraine is making them look really bad. Yeah.
Oh yes, they look like they're like we'll support Ukraine for as far as it wants our support, either in kind or out of kind.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think we've made quite a lot of reference to American foreign policy. If you could just get a bit granular to what could be the key elements of just American foreign policy, or let's say the foreign policy of Wakanda. It's a fictional country. What would it have, and how peculiar is America with those core facets of a foreign policy?
I think for the 90s, for a time, America claimed that its foreign policy was about promoting democracy. But I think for a lot of people who experienced what that was about, it was really about America advancing its own interests. I think one of the people who really explains it very well, and he's quite controversial, is John Mearsheimer. He says that the international world is basically, there's no institutions, there's nothing. It's about bullying. It's about showing your might. It's about, coming out on top, And one thing that's consistent about America is it advances the interests of what it believes the interest to be of its nation. So you'll see that even the only thing that will allow America to shift its foreign policy is usually if it feels that something is against its national security. And as you see with Trump, how he's been able to shift this is by saying that how he's able to wield so much power is by saying that America's security interests are at stake, which has allowed all this shifting. So I think the one consistent thing about America is that it's always advancing the interests of who it believes its priority citizens to be.
So what I get from there, and again, you could guide here, is protection of a nation's interests is at the heart of like a foreign policy program, protection of national security. If I get you right, what you're saying is if you deduce or like just boil down a foreign policy program, a country uses it to protect its interests, of any nature and also protect national security. Just
Yeah, and they're written down.
highlighted,
I
yeah.
think America, before Trump, they had a foreign policy document. I think it involved music. It involved like what they were going to do. And under Trump, it's been clear that they're moving towards a commercial diplomacy. And it's written, and he says that we're now deviating to something that's commercial diplomacy. I think South Africa has one. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's called the White Paper. Yeah. So I think yeah.
I got you. But maybe we could devolve into the different aspects of that. I understand that things like soft power, hard power.
Yes.
How does a nation, let's say, how does America categorize how they are approaching all the specific aspects of soft power, hard power,
So I think
commercial diplomacy? Yes.
so before soft power was what we saw with USID. Like I think for Uganda, we had like most of our healthcare being funded by America, and then I think the hard power was so then we had a security contract with America, like to fight terrorism and to help stabilize some places. So I think soldiers were trained with the United States, and they'd go along for missions like AMISOM. They'd go into ADF, and they'd go into all these kind of things. And then hard power is, I think, military bases, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
Oh, I get you. Okay. And I think we've seen the commercial diplomacy lately.
Yeah, with
Some
Trump,
of
where
it is coercive.
he'll say, "What can America get from here?" And I think for a lot of what can America get out of this? And I think a lot of Africans, if you speak to a lot of Africans, they actually like that. They like that it's clear and you can tell us what we can give you. And many people were kind of have this understanding of USID that was negative. And they're actually wanting something that's so clear cut. They're like, America says, I want entrepreneurs, and they imagine that this was going to happen. But I think those people are mistaken, because even under prior, we had something called the AGOA Trade Act that we highly underutilized. And for a lot of people like us who are in civil society, we know the impact of USID, we know the impact of NGOs, we know. And as much as, of course, people who are Pan-Africanists will say it was creating dependence, it was creating all these things, many of us know that Uganda had formed a system that was based on that. And the economic shocks and the immediate reality of people that are relying on these things is terrible.
Yeah, it's terrible. The Minister of Health went to Parliament and they were saying they need Parliament to cover a 604 billion shortfall, and that's huge. But let's just fold into the chart on, of course, America and Ukraine. So why is this war very important for America? Why they look so interested and invested in the war? And what is the need for them? What's their interest?
I think what America is, what Trump is saying actually, or how he's what President Trump is copying out of the thing, is saying that his official statement is that this was not our war, this is Biden's war, and most Americans are against this war, and we feel like we've been pulled into a war that's actually Europe's doing, and President Biden's administration, and what he claims is that they wanted nothing to do with a war. They just want peace and they want a protectionist society. However, with what President Trump is requesting of Ukraine, with the minerals that are in these critical areas that they're connected to, people think that the interest in this war now, under the President Trump presidency, is those minerals. Yeah.
I remember there was some form of economic guarantees they were requesting from Ukraine. Do you want to walk us through those economic guarantees?
I think that at a time after the shift from President Biden to Trump, President Trump actually sat down with President Zelensky, and we saw barraged him for the expense of the war, barraged him for them not allowing an election and all these kind of things, and then explained the cost of the cost it was weighing on America, and then explained to him that if they should continue to support Ukraine, that they should get a minerals deal. Same as the cost of America's support to DRC has been something to do with minerals and that agreement. So that's been the new shift.
Yeah, I understand that. I think some European countries had also started trading that line. They either support you and it's like a loan to the country, which you're gonna have to pay in the long term. I see where that is going. Maybe just to get into this last week's issue, which is we saw European leaders in Washington. Wow, I had expected President Zelensky to go there. in alone. I just want to understand what's the broader European interest in this specific war.
I think for
They look quite equally invested
in the
in
war.
the outcome, in the process, in pretty much everything.
I think for EU and Ukraine and President Biden, it seemed, or at least what they were consistent on, was that this was a territorial invasion of Ukraine. And that's true. They said that Russia had invaded Ukraine under the guise that it was because NATO had broken its pact. However, what many Ukrainian activists are arguing is that that's just a cop-out, that this is an invasion that's being predicated on something that is false. That in fact, the reason Finland, right, didn't enter NATO and there hasn't been an advance from Russia, from that breach. So they're saying that actually this territorial encroachment by Russia into Ukraine sets a precedent in the world that an imperial precedent that countries can invade and they can be rewarded with things like land swaps. And I think for EU, that has been at least consistently democratically aligned. At least even when this happened in Rwanda with Congo, they said that they pulled out. They said that you have to protect territorial integrity. And when it happened in Gaza, much of the EU prime ministers and the leaders, and I think even now France, their rhetoric is at least saying that this kind of advancement, this kind of territorial encroachment is not correct. Yeah, so I think for them it's more of a human rights thing, which I think they're consistent about. Is that it's not okay for a country to violate another country's territorial integrity, and so they're supporting Ukraine on that basis. That this invasion from Russia needs to be stopped, and we can't go back to a world where this kind of thing is okay.
I get where you're coming from. Maybe if we're to do the comparison, what's in terms of intervention within Ukraine, or let's say the kind of support they're trying to lend to Ukraine, what are the glaring differences between how America is approaching it and how Europe is approaching it? Because it looks, the negotiations they're having, I think, forwards within last week, and I think in coming weeks, it's towards harmonization. What are the differences? And
so the most recent difference is EU and Ukraine are asking for an immediate ceasefire. President Trump, before he went to Alaska summit, where he spoke to Putin, was with them. He was saying that a ceasefire needs to happen. However, after his meeting with President Putin, he came out and said that a ceasefire is not necessary, that actually he has solved all the 6 wars that he's part of by allowing for he's done these during times of war. And what analysts like John Marshall will say that Trump is just negotiating with the fact that he's powerless, So according to Russia's argument, their invasion is in response to NATO's encroachment on the integrity of Russia. That NATO increasing its influence in Ukraine is posing a threat to Russia. So EU and Ukraine want America, if it can't put the ceasefire, to put security guarantees, because they know, as has been consistent with President Putin, is that he lies. So he's not consistent. He'll say a ceasefire this, and then he'll continue invading. He'll say this is okay. So they're saying that it's not enough to take the word of Putin. So they're saying that America must put security guarantees. So analysts like John Marshall are saying that now America is powerless in this situation, because beyond word of mouth and saying that forcing Putin to do a ceasefire, they cannot force Putin's hand without now even encroaching on Russia more territory, because a security guarantor is something that's consistent with what NATO provides its allies. Yeah, pretty much. So that breach would be something that Russia could now come in again and say, you providing security guarantors is now again enhancing our reason for invading in the first place. Because why Putin is claiming that he's invading is because
NATO is approaching, and pretty much USA is close to Russia still. So
the difference is
1 + 1 - 1 = 0. We're going to find ourselves in that situation in which we find ourselves. But if we're to just interrogate Washington's meeting with with Russia, what exactly were they trying to achieve? Are they trying to, like sometimes when a child is sick, then you just hold their mouth. Okay, when I was young, they used to do that. And then you ensure they eat if they don't want to eat. What's the stakeholder analysis? Is there a will for stakeholders to take on this US-led, Trump-led solution? And what are they trying to achieve by negotiating with Russia?
I think that well, according to some analysts like John Mashama, this is in US's best national interest, because a war that everybody claimed would end very soon and that Russia would be humiliated is not ending. EU has said that it's on the side of Russia, but as people have shown, the amount of aid that they're giving to Ukraine, right, is surpassed by the amount of fuel that they're still buying from Russia. So it shows that there's a dependency of EU and those European countries still on Russia. So this war has kind of proven Russia's might, and America hasn't always had a bad relationship with Russia to begin with. So I think America has always been in the interest of something that's powerful. So I think what Trump and people in the US who are okay with this new US-Russia relationship are saying that this is in the best interest of Russia, because even the significance of having that thing in Alaska is there was a time where Alaska was actually given to the US. You see, so I think Trump's understanding of let's keep talking to Russia is that Russia's proved itself. So why not bring a powerful person closer? So even as much as, so that's what it's about. Symbolically, it's bringing Russia into the fold.
I get you. And I imagine that maybe recognizing the strength of your enemy, regardless of like the differences you have with them, could be a step towards the right direction. Did you follow the proceedings of the 7 leaders who are in Washington?
The ones that went to see about Ukraine. Yes, I did. And sorry, just to correct you, I didn't say that it's a good thing, because also somebody would argue, why would US bring Russia closer and then not bring China? So there's something else that's happening, because if China was a world power, there's, why not bring China closer? Why compete with China and then bring Russia closer? There's something else that's happening, Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to get into away from that's a question actually I was about to get to, on whether you did follow through. I know Trump. This is pretty much like his last term in office, so I imagine. I believe in democracy. I believe the constitution will remain, and this will be his last term. Do you think this objective is achievable along this road? From what I hear, these attempts to negotiate with Putin have not been very successful. So what's unique about this specific process?
I think there's something there about normalizing Russia. Yeah? Because how America is operating, from how we understand liberal democratic America, at least, in rhetoric, right? Has, like America has disbanded USID, they're now putting CDC, they have a minerals deal in DRC, they're bringing Russia, that's a power contender, closer, they're asking Ukraine for minerals, they are, what we saw with Gaza. I think America is very intent on competing now, and remember, this is all about critical minerals. All the wars that are going on are fundamentally about critical minerals. So if you normalize, So like if you're fighting an ideological war where you're saying human rights, this and this, which is what I think EU and the other nations are doing, and essentially the entire world when it comes to Palestine and Gaza, but America is saying that we're standing with Russia that has invaded for minerals. And we're also pulling out of ICC. We're standing by Israel. We've got minerals in Congo. You can see that America is doing what it's always done, which is rely on the hammer or rely on might. So they're like, you guys can have the moral higher ground, maybe, but we're gonna we're gonna rely on power.
Things done. We're not going for the.
We're going to prepare ourselves for the race. Yeah.
I get you, and I think in the second segment of the podcast, I'd like us to draw parallels between, say, how US has approached the Ukrainian-Russian war and the Israel-Palestinian war, and see what that means for the broader US foreign policy. Keep glued. We'll be back.
The Center for Policy Analysis is an independent think tank shaping parliamentary democracy, governance, and public policy in Uganda and beyond. Our mission is to shape public policy and strengthen democratic governance by delivering high-quality research, fostering collaboration, and empowering citizens. Our vision is a democratic society with transparent, accountable, and responsive governance systems. What sets CEPA apart? A unique consortium model that integrates expertise from diverse partners for multidisciplinary approaches. We pioneer thought leadership, leveraging tools like artificial intelligence to enhance impact. Through collaborative advocacy, we empower stakeholders to engage with legislative processes, all while combining rigorous research with a deep understanding of Uganda's political economy. Our flagship initiatives include Parliament Watch Uganda, that bridges the gap between the citizens and Parliament, the Policy Digest podcast that explores politics and public affairs across Africa, and the CEPA Convo, our bi-monthly X-Space tackling key public issues. Our work spans parliamentary democracy, human rights, public health, road safety, climate justice, artificial intelligence, and more, including the Africa Regional Conference on Parliament and Legislation. Join CEPA in shaping policies, amplifying voices, and building a democratic future. Visit www.cepa.or.ug to learn more or follow us on social media. The Center for Policy Analysis, a leading public policy think tank.
Oh yes, welcome back. So maybe if we just stop where we continue where we stopped, which is, are there any parallels we can construct between how America is approaching the Israel and Palestine war and the Ukraine-Russia war, and any patterns, any differences that we can construct?
I think there's definitely an imbalance. I think, for example, with Israel, America's 10 hands down with Israel. I think, as we've all seen, like to the point of like even pulling out of the ICC. Like they're showing that they have a stronger relationship with Israel than they do with Ukraine. Ukraine, from the time Zelensky got into power and he was shamed for wearing the wrong garb, and he was, and how the meeting with the EU looked, a separate meeting for Putin in Alaska, and just, the modest around, a table when it came to the White House leaders. There's really a
I remember that meeting there. I did. Oh, God,
yeah, it really
like
showed.
Prefect,
Yeah,
head teacher.
yeah, it really showed that the dynamic has changed. Like you're no longer the most close to the US as you were, because you enjoyed such a, like this relationship with America before. Now it's proving that they don't have that kind of relationship anymore.
I got you. In this specific case, of course I want us to be careful as we get into that area. I understand Israel has been condemned quite a great deal in terms of how it's approaching the war. And also in this specific case, the US seems to be leaning towards not necessarily supporting Russia, but heralding them as crucial to the process. Is US's approach changing to maybe siding with the aggressor in order to solve disagreements? Or maybe is that a pattern they have always had?
I think, as we said before, the winner. Like the US is likely to always want to come out on top, which somebody else would describe as being in the national interest of the US. Because in how the US understands the global world is that there's no institutions, there's no this, and without it, all you have is power. So the US will always look for power. It won't look for moralism. It won't look for human, like that was in the past with the 90s with liberalism, when it was a unipolar world. In a world that's not unipolar, the US is looking for power. It's not Good Samaritan. It's not advancing democracy. It's looking for who is likely to win so that we can secure the interests of our people without relying on anybody else.
I get you. And I know Europe is virtue signaling as a protector of human rights, as flag holder for freedoms around the world. what is in it for them? Because I understand, and I think this we go again to Bernie Sanders' opening, which is on the concept of the Monroe Doctrine, which is that Russia could be having a claim to that territory in self-defense against a possible attack against NATO. What is in it for them to walk one line and ignore the practical reality, if I were to say, which is that global powers have spheres of influence that they control, and that's Russia's.
So I think Europe wants a just world, and I think it's more than just words. I think I think I had the opportunity to work close with somebody who was very close to the EU foreign policy, and during that time period, they made a point to show us that a lot of what was happening in Russia was only benefiting the elite. I don't know if you're an average Ugandan, right? And then you hear maybe our CDF or our president talk about the bigger picture of Pan-Africanism. You almost don't want to hear any of that. Yeah. I'm trying to say. So when Russia tells you that, I'm doing this to get territory because of Russia, regular Russians know that that's not benefiting them. They know that this is a power grab. This is something that's only going to benefit the elite. And in terms of, I remember she would tell us about all the repression that happens in Russia. And she'll show us, she'll tell us that, by the way, some people don't even have toilets. You know what I'm trying to say? So it was even that show of power, that show of I'm doing this for territory, I'm doing this. It's actually just for a few people. It's a power grab. And if you're part of these countries, the consequence of allowing such an elite power, because you're not safe next. You know what I'm trying to say? Because nobody knows how far Russia will go. Because how do you know it's going to stop where it said it's going to stop? How do you know it's going to stop only at Donbass? How do you know next it's not going to go to Finland? How do you know it's not going to extend to you? So EU is genuinely protecting its what it believes to be the ideal order of their world. They don't want to make a world where might is what happens. And for a long time, they felt safe a bit because they could rely on America's military powers to come in and back them up. But now they know they can't. And remember, I don't know if you watched a press conference. I think Jeffrey Sachs was talking to EU and telling them, you guys no longer have the military you used to have. So you can no longer stand for your ideals. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think even Trump did
said that, yeah.
You have to find a bit of NATO, you will not make it anymore.
You've been on a free ride, you've been,
free lunch or ride.
Yeah.
But have they upped their spending on the military? I think I heard of conversations of that nature.
I think they would like to, of course, but as you do that, you're agitating Russia more and you're giving it more reason to because Russia's premise, or at least what it claims its premise to be, is that we don't want any more. And it has these bylines and it compares and it says, is NATO allowed to do this? So they also have a limit. And also EU is largely reliant on Russia. I mean, they need stuff from Russia and they've continued to trade. So they also can only go so far without endangering the interests of their own citizens.
I get you. And war is quite costly.
Yeah, it is.
It's quite costly. Maybe I understand that US pulled out of Afghanistan, of course Vietnam and other ones as well. What lessons did they learn and how have they extracted those lessons and imbibed them within their foreign policy? That way Germany did. What lessons did they aggregate and say, these are going to be things we don't repeat? Yes.
I think they no longer do boots on the ground. They no longer, because Vietnam, it was embarrassing these were people were making handmade bombs and they were taking a US military person, right? So I think they shifted from just, we don't have that prowess anymore. So we're not going to invest in boots on the ground. And then they moved into what we see today, which is drones. So they started getting into the techmanship of things.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that's one lesson they learned. I think when you see with USID and stuff, a lot of the argument that Trump's team has been making and has been backed up by a lot of other journalists is saying that a lot of USID was interfering or trading with terrorists or creating this kind of thing. And with the disbanding of the USID, I think people are thinking that's a lesson they learned, that kind of military intervention through that kind of soft power is not working and it's not beneficial. And so they've shifted more to commercial diplomacy, I think, and to tech, which I think is actually heavily reliable. And I think if you guys follow Tim Caligera, he's always asking a very interesting question. He says, what does it mean when you buy weapons, right, that have been made by these countries? And you know how with tech these days they can control or they can look into what you're doing. So that also says something, because I think then it gives them a lot of leverage, understanding, and how you fight. Because as much as people think they're independent and they're buying weapons, it's like, what does it mean that these weapons have tracking, that they have these things? I mean, some of these things, like where you can, I think there's something where you can turn off a signal and it can jam weapons or it can jam finding people and stuff like that. But it's like, what does it mean that people who are so technologically advanced are the ones that sold this kind of thing to you? So I think they're harnessing the military warfare so that it's consistent with technology and stuff like that. So I think, those are the lessons they learned.
That way, the military control can it actually is power. When you have that kind of power, you're good to go. I think something happened in Somalia, I think, when they were intervening in Somalia in the flesh, boots on ground. Yeah. And then they dragged, I think, the body through Mogadishu. And
it was
it was humiliating. I don't know what lessons they are going to carry forward from how different administrations have handled. First of all, even I imagine that wouldn't just happen, the Ukrainian-Russian war. I don't think it just happened. Must have been like a simmering volcano of sorts. I don't know, maybe within the 10, 20 years, how this pattern would have shaped American foreign policy. What do you think?
I think what Al-Hajjah professor always tells us is this thing is about minerals, and like we're gunning for a technological revolution or something like the fourth industrial revolution, and every country in the world is looking for minerals. China is fortunate that it has these minerals naturally within its territory, but countries like EU and US, they don't have them. So I think what's happening now is like, can we source these minerals through the goodwill of these people? Are they going to sell them to us, or do we have to go in and fight and take them off their land and displace them and get those minerals? I think EU has a bit of a soft power relationship, which is we're going to come in, we're going to send our people to work, they're going to make relationships, they're going to get married, and that sort of thing. I don't know if you saw like in that.
Okay, I didn't see that.
Yeah, you see that.
The marriage.
No, but you know that literally Ngugi wa Thiong'o argues against it. He says that a lot of those marriages that people think it's actually a way to get land and and usually this might sound like a conspiracy theory, but it really isn't. When you talk about foreign policy stuff, there's a lot of like these diplomatic missions, right? When they come into the country, they're sourcing to see where these minerals, prime sites, and
like an entire economic. Imagine, I think embassies.
Yeah,
must be like an economic wing within an embassy, and
that's looking for this kind of stuff. So like you buy land,
you back to Washington,
I think Washington would actually just remove. What you've seen with DRC, they can get you to literally just give them the minerals. But I think Europe has a more of like, we'll move in, we'll settle. You see more Europeans around. They're arguing for a more multicultural world. They're saying everyone can live in, And then I think in our foreign policy class, we talked about how one of those coffee farms is actually owned by a big German investor, and he displaced a lot of indigenous people for land. So they have So it's like, everybody wants minerals
to be helping their community and building livelihoods and.
Yeah, what Africa needs to learn and appreciate, I think, is we are the blessed ones in terms of like we look poor, but what's on our land and our weather conditions and all this stuff is something those guys have aspired for a long time. So, I think sometimes you walk around with a European or you walk around with somebody who's from like the diaspora, maybe black or white or whatever, and they'll tell you that like, I feel alive. I feel, all these things that we take for granted, and they know, and their places are barren. They have like tough weather conditions. They have all these things. Granted, this will all change with climate change, but like these guys have always had their sights on where we are. And we've just never had the sovereignty, I think, to decide what to do as a nation, and we've never had, so we have no say on on what happens in our country, and that's been unfortunate. But people plan on Africa, and they know what's here.
I get you. Maybe as we close that logical rope before we move to the next question is, within Africa, which country has like a very, let's say, glaringly significant foreign policy program that we could see as a template? It's something that is very, very aggressive.
I think I think the best foreign policy, or the most developed written down, has to be from South Africa. In fact, even when they were supporting, how they had intellectual foundation for their support for Palestine was within their foreign policy, at least like on paper. I think another country that has a very consistent foreign policy is Rwanda for its citizens. I think in the practice that we've seen, and it's very strategic. You can see with its call, like everybody knows. Yeah, it's and it's very it's consistent. It's intentional.
Rwanda.
They move as a body. Of course, it has its problems that we'll talk about later. But
you didn't say Uganda.
That Uganda has a foreign policy.
We're in Somalia. We're in which other country? We're in Congo.
But I think
we probably let me see. South Sudan, we're everywhere. Even Kenya has soldiers in Haiti. Soft power.
So Kenya and Uganda are interesting because you know how you see a good, consistent foreign policy is if it's in line with even the lowest citizen. When South Africa is defending Palestine, there is a foundation. There is like Mandela. There's, everybody in South Africa knows why we're defending Palestine. It's within the fabric of our history. If Uganda was to go right now and tell you that, if you ask a regular Ugandan, why are we in Somalia? What are we doing? They'll be like, oh, those guys are getting, American money. You know what I'm trying to say?
Right?
It's so divorced from the person. So that's how you measure, how good your foreign policy is. With Rwanda, everybody knows the game. Everybody knows we are
football.
Football with this, basketball influences. Everybody knows what Rwanda is doing. When they're going to Congo, they're like, we're defending Banyamulenge. They have something that's consistent within their history. So those are the guys that, given its problems and everything, but that's how you understand the foreign policy.
What would Uganda do to create that level of ownership?
I think
I think even Americans, like you were saying in your rhetoric, you're like, Trump is aggressing towards ensuring we have peace because, like most Americans, are against the war in Ukraine. These are things we haven't heard. Are Ugandans in for the war in Congo? Are they in for the war in Sudan? What's their opinion of Somalia? What's their opinion on I don't know what else? International climate agreements. I'm quite curious. How do you drive like that sort of ownership? And I think even Brexit had an element of local ownership and how Britain interacts with its neighbors within the European Union. How do you drive that local agency?
I think, first of all, it's hard in Uganda because of the tribalism, the military dictatorships. Of course, there's some echelons of our society have a Pan-Africanism foreign policy. So you hear in conversations between, when you hear the CDF talking or you hear Museveni talking, they have a Pan-African sentiment, right? But I think another thing that I've seen them trying recently is how you see people developing a coffee ethos about Uganda, or marathons or soccer.
Coffee,
coffee, soccer,
I think
and marathons, and tourism. So they're trying to drive people to be invested, like Rwanda is in chimpanzees, stuff like that. You're seeing people, gravitating towards that, and with coffee.
It was like a Patricia ethos.
Yeah, I think that's and also Matoke and stuff like that. People are really trying to get us to be excited about those kind of things and our exports and stuff like that. So I think for me, that's where I find some sort of thing. And recently with the soccer, how everybody, despite their feelings towards Uganda, felt good when Uganda defeated South Africa. So that's something I think our government can do.
Around local ownership. Okay, that's good in terms of what they would do. What do other countries do to promote that level of participation that, of course, translates into ownership? What do they do?
What do other countries do? I think if you meet what people are interested in, for example, actually Uganda for a long time had a security, could form patriotism around security. For a long time everybody thought the reason Uganda was secure was because of NRM and people's fear of war. What was driving their sense of ownership towards our foreign policy and stuff like that. I think in Rwanda, what they do is President Kagame is really good at being in rhythm with young people, and he has their respect, and so he really looks into what they're looking forward to. He sees young people want basketball, so he'll bring investment into that kind of thing.
Basketball,
He invested in their history. I mean, when you go to Rwanda, you can't go away without talking about the genocidal memorial. So everyone's aware of what he understands to be a security threat. Everyone is in tune. So every Rwandan will understand why we're going into DRC, why we're fighting. I mean, of course, not every Rwandan will agree, the intricacies, the contradictions
of course,
there.
yeah.
But at least, that's their foreign policy. Like the training, the stuff like that. It's, and I think for South Africa, they have a very rich history, I think. And I mean, their curriculums, their, how they understand themselves has been in tune with Palestine and apartheid, anti-apartheid and stuff like that. But of course, they also have failed because a lot of people can't understand how South Africa, that was helped by African countries, is xenophobic today. So they also have their failings.
There are the contradictions and I don't know what we would do to our system, maybe what glaring examples would have in our past, but I think as we forge some form of, let's say, cultural consensus on how we want to brand ourselves, because like you said, it's participatory. Of course, the leader has a fulcrum, but it starts with the people, technically. Maybe as we close, just a thought experiment. I understand there have been a number of wars that have happened. World War I, World War II. Okay, every other war. Greeks, the Romans loved fighting. I was about to say Maji Rebellion.
Mau Mau,
the Zulus. In terms of how wars end, where do you see this going? Do you think we're on the right track in terms of how wars eventually end? Or do you see this dragging on I think there was which just continue dragging and they keep morphing into different accessory wars, yes.
I think more than understanding how wars end, because wars usually end in defeat, which is the truth. Like
one has
defeat or surrender.
Point,
that's it. But I think we should look into why wars begin in the first place, because even people who are proponents of people who know about Israel and Gaza, how it came to be, people can say that there were so many opportunities to stop the escalation of what we see today. You know what I'm trying to say? So if you know why that war began, you'll know that by 1970s, even the idea of placing a state in some place like the Middle East, you know what I'm trying to say? So you have to look back to why a war begins to see why a war starts. So war is almost inevitable when it's baked into the foundations of something. And there's so many opportunities for the war to be stopped, but people ignore them because they never think it will reach that point. So maybe when you look at the wars that are happening right now, maybe start thinking about a way of maybe we need to stop thinking about, minerals being owned by countries, or maybe we need to stop, it shouldn't be based. But if I was trying to stop wars,
you would make minerals to be the property of the earth.
Or maybe you put laws in place that means that you can't, or if minerals
can nationalize the mineral sector, it should be a function of liberalism. Pretty much what
that's what
did
Iran tried to do.
Yeah?
Iran literally did that. They nationalized their oil, and it was basically for the country and stuff like that. But of course, that led to it invited imperial powers in place to take those oils because they felt there was ownership of the oil. So almost it's it's almost inevitable with how we understand ourselves.
It's quite a debate, yeah.
But when you see young people, especially young people in imperial places, or I think almost every young person in America was against the war in Gaza. And a lot of people were against that understanding of imperialism. And I think to see that digital, to see digitally people being killed because they happen to be the wrong, it comes into your mind. I remember we grew up knowing about the Holocaust. So you invest in young people. You invest in them so much that you know that in the future, that there's nobody who's going to justify this thing, and that person won't be able to attain power.
Oh, yeah.
And one big show of that has been Zoran's success in New York.
Yeah.
I mean, this thing has really shaken the core of America's understanding that something like a socialist democrat makes sense. You know, the fact that a
now
Muslim,
in 2025.
yeah,
Yes.
but that's preparation, because you know that the next generation that has seen a Muslim that was backed by a Jewish, you know, in New York, which is the capitalist
center.
state of the world, you know, that they're going to grow up with a completely different understanding of ownership and of life and of wanting multiculturalism and all these kind of things. So you've prevented something. You know, people can say no more in my name, no more in this. Maybe it's idealistic, but at least it's investing in, like, we won't have that kind of war again.
Yeah, well, we need to participate in the prevention of it. And then, some things are war themselves. So when you start them, you're sure that every other day you will defend them by more gallons of blood day in, day out. I agree. Thank you, Natasha, for sharing your time with us. It was.
Thank you so much for having
very
me. I had a
constructive.
lot of fun, and I think this is a really important space, and I'm really glad that you guys are doing this. And I hope that, despite talking a lot, because I'm very verbose, that at least people benefited from this, and we caught something.
We learned a lot, and I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to our audience. We hope you loved it about whether American foreign policy with regards to Ukraine, Russian war is working or not. We hope you learned quite a lot, and keep glued to our podcasting platforms. That's on YouTube and on Podbean and other platforms. See you next time. Thank you for listening to the Policy Digest podcast, the Center for Policy Analysis podcast that is profiling African ideas and people that are shaping the future of their communities. Subscribe to all our platforms on YouTube and Podbean.